The blood on her hands had frozen into a thin red glaze by the time she reached the seer's cave, and the smell rising from the offering bowl she carried was copper and pine sap and something older, something that lived in the marrow of dead things. Elara had been walking for 6 hours through snow that reached her thighs. Her feet had stopped hurting 2 hours ago, which she knew was a bad sign. The thin leather boots she wore had been discarded by someone in the grey mist pack, left beside the compost heap behind the kitchens where she worked. She had fished them out and stuffed dried grass inside to fill the gap where someone else's wider feet had stretched the leather. Now the grass was wet and frozen, and she could feel ice crystals forming between her toes like tiny teeth biting down. She was 23 years old. She had been the Grey Mist Pack's herb keeper for 9 years, since the day her mother died, coughing blood into a basin, and no one else wanted the job of crawling through brambles to harvest wolfsbane and feverfew. Before that, she had been the herb keeper's daughter. Before that, she supposed she had simply been a child, though she could barely remember what that felt like. The cave mouth appeared through the snowfall like a wound in the mountainside. Black rock, streaked with mineral deposits that caught what little light bled through the clouds. The air changed as she stepped inside, warmer by degrees. Wet stone and tallow candle smoke, and underneath it all, something animal. Something that had been alive in this cave for a very long time. She didn't know that the Alpha King of the Iron Vale was already 3 miles south of her, driving his wolves through the frozen forest with a fury that had made even his beta flinch. She didn't know that his wolves had been blinded. She didn't know that everything she was about to trade would be the very thing that brought him to her door. All she knew was that the seer had something she needed, and the seer's price was always flesh. The cave went deeper than it should have. Elara followed the dripping walls with her free hand, the offering bowl balanced in the other, and counted her steps. 40, 60, 80. At 112, the tunnel opened into a chamber lit by dozens of candles set into niches carved from the rock. The wax had dripped and pooled and solidified into formations that looked almost organic, like pale growths reaching upward from the stone floor. The seer sat in the center of the chamber on a chair made from antlers lashed together with sinew. She was old. Not old the way pack elders were old, with silver hair and lined faces and a certain authority in their posture. Old the way mountains are old. Her skin had the texture of birch bark, papery and layered, and her eyes were the milky white of river stones polished smooth by decades of current. She was blind. She had been blind, according to the stories, since before any wolf alive could remember. But she saw things, everyone knew that. Maren. That was her name, though few used it. To the packs scattered across the northern territories, she was simply the seer, the one who read futures in blood and bone, the one whose prices made grown wolves weep. Elara set the offering bowl down on the flat stone that served as a table between them. The contents had congealed during the walk. Liver from a winter hare, caught that morning in a snare she had set 3 days ago. Blood from her own palm, drawn with the knife she used for cutting herbs. And 3 seeds of moonflower, which grew only in the shadow of the Grey Mist Pack's boundary stones, and which Elara cultivated in secret, in a wooden box she kept beneath her cot in the root cellar where she slept. The seer's nostrils flared. Her blind eyes tracked the bowl without seeing it. "You are the herb keeper," the seer said. Her voice was dry leaves scraping over stone. Elara nodded, then remembered the woman couldn't see. "Yes, you tend what grows in the dark places. You know the names of things that kill and things that cure. You smell of valerian and cold earth and something else. Something buried so deep, even you have forgotten it's there." Elara's throat tightened. She had not come here to be read. She had come here to make a deal. "The grey mist pack is dying," she said. The seer tilted her head. "Every pack north of the Iron River is dying, child. The blight wolves came down from the ashlands 3 moons ago, and they carry a sickness in their breath. It gets into the eyes first, clouds them like old milk, then blindness. Then the wolves themselves begin to forget what they are. They can't shift. They can't hunt. They starve, standing upright in their human skin." "I know what the blight does," Elara said. She heard the edge in her own voice and swallowed it. "I've been treating the symptoms for weeks. I've tried every herb I know. Silvervein, blackroot, even the old remedies, the ones my mother used to whisper about. Nothing holds. The blindness spreads. And so you came to me. You made a cure once." Elara leaned forward. She could smell the seer now, up close. Dried lavender and old wool, and beneath it the sharp mineral tang of something not entirely human. 60 years ago, the last time the blight wolves came. You made a cure, and you gave it to the iron packs, and their wolves could see again. They hunted. They survived. The seer's lips pulled back from teeth that were too sharp, too numerous for a human mouth. "I remember. I need that cure." "No." The word landed like a stone, dropped into still water. Elara felt the ripples of it move through her chest. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean the cure requires something I no longer possess." The seer's hands, gnarled and spotted, folded in her lap. "It requires sight, living sight. Eyes that still hold the light of the moon in them. The cure is brewed in darkness, but it must be seen into existence. The one who makes it must pour their own vision into the draught. Every drop of it. The cure takes everything and gives nothing back." Elara sat very still. The candles flickered. Somewhere in the deep of the cave, water dripped with a rhythm that sounded almost like a heartbeat. "You want my eyes," she said. The seer said nothing. "You want me to go blind, so you can make a cure for wolves I don't even know. Wolves from packs that have never spoken my name, except to spit after it. The grey mist wolves will die too, child. Your pack." Elara almost laughed. The sound came out broken, more like a cough. "My pack. I sleep in a root cellar on a cot with a broken leg that I've propped up with a cinder block. The pack cook throws vegetable peels at me when she wants me out of the kitchen. The Alpha's son, Callum, once held me down in the mud behind the training yard and cut my hair with a field knife because he said Omegas shouldn't have anything pretty. I am not their pack. I am their shadow. I am the thing they look through." She stopped. The echo of her own voice came back to her from the cave walls, thin and sharp and more honest than she had intended. The seer waited. Elara looked at the offering bowl. The hare's liver had turned a dull greyish brown in the candlelight. The moonflower seeds sat in the congealed blood, like 3 pale teeth. "How many wolves would the cure save?" she asked. "As many as need it." The seer's blind eyes seemed to focus on something past Elara, through her. "The blight has spread to 7 packs. The Iron Veil, the Stonewood, the Blackthorn, the Grey Mist, 3 smaller clans to the east, perhaps 2,000 wolves in total, perhaps more. If the blight reaches the lowland packs by spring, 5,000. 2,000 wolves, blind and starving, and forgetting how to shift. Elara thought about the grey mist wolves. She thought about Ronan, the old tracker who had once left a bundle of dried mint outside her cellar door without a word. She thought about the pups in the nursery who didn't yet know enough to hate her. She thought about Yara, the cook's daughter, who was 14 and had just shifted for the first time last autumn, and whose eyes, when Alara had last seen her, had begun to cloud at the edges. She thought about what it would mean to never see again, to never watch the moonflower seeds split open in spring, to never read the careful handwriting in her mother's herbalist journal, the one possession she had managed to keep hidden beneath a loose stone in the cellar floor, to walk through the world in permanent midnight. "What would I be after?" she asked. "Alive," the seer said. "Blind, but alive. Can I still work? Can I still keep herbs? You will learn to know them by touch and smell. You already know them better than most wolves know their own children." Alara closed her eyes. The darkness behind her lids was warm and familiar. She tried to imagine it permanent. She tried to imagine it as the only thing she would ever see again. The candles smelled of beeswax and tallow. The stone beneath her was cold through her skirts. Her frozen feet were beginning to thaw, and the pain was extraordinary, like dozens of needles being pushed slowly through the soles. "Do it," she said. The seer moved faster than something that old should have been able to move. Her hands were on Alara's face before Alara could draw a breath, thumbs pressing against her closed eyelids with a pressure that was firm but not yet painful. "Keep your eyes closed," the seer said. "This works better if you don't watch it happen." Alara felt heat. It started behind her eyes and spread outward, filling her skull like warm water being poured into a bowl. There was light, impossible light, brighter than anything she had ever seen, bright enough to see through her closed lids, bright enough to see through bone. She saw the color of her own blood. She saw the branching pattern of the veins in her eyelids like the canopy of a forest viewed from below. She saw everything, every detail of everything, for one blazing instant. Then the light went out. Not gradually, not like a sunset or a candle guttering. It simply stopped, the way a heartbeat stops. One moment there was light, the next there was nothing. Not darkness, nothing. The absence of the very concept of seeing. Alara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hands flew to her face. Her eyes were still there, still wet, still blinking. But they were empty. She could feel them moving in their sockets, searching for input that would never come again. The seer's hands withdrew. Alara heard the old woman stand, heard the creak of the antler chair, heard footsteps moving away, and then the sound of glass bottles being uncorked, liquid being poured, something being crushed with a mortar and pestle. "It is done," the seer said from somewhere to Alara's left. "The cure will take 3 days to brew. I will send it with the mountain ravens to every afflicted pack. By the next full moon, the wolves will see again." Alara sat in her permanent midnight and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The deal was made. The price was paid. "Can you find your way back?" the seer asked. Alara stood. Her legs shook. The pain in her feet had become a distant roaring, like a waterfall heard from the other side of a mountain. "I walked here in a blizzard," she said. "I can walk back in the dark." She turned and began to count her steps. 1, 2, 3. She trailed her hand along the wet cave wall and followed it toward the distant smell of snow and open air. She did not hear the seer whisper after she had gone, in a voice so low it might have been the cave itself breathing. "Moonblood. I have not smelled moonblood in 300 years. That girl has no idea what she is. The blizzard had not stopped. If anything, it had gotten worse. The wind hit Alara's face like an open palm when she emerged from the cave, driving ice crystals into the skin of her cheeks and forehead. She couldn't see them now. She could only feel them. Tiny cold impacts, like being stung by frozen bees. She turned downhill. Downhill was the direction she had come from. Downhill would lead her back to the tree line, and from there to the river path, and from there to the grey mist settlement. She knew this the way she knew the names of herbs, with a certainty that lived in her muscles rather than her mind. She made it perhaps a quarter-mile before she fell the first time. A rock hidden under the snow, a dip in the terrain she would have seen and stepped over if she could still see. Her shin hit the rock, and pain flared white-hot. She went down on her hands and knees in the snow, gasping. The offering bowl, which she had been carrying empty out of habit, flew from her hand and landed somewhere she would never find. She got up. She walked. She fell again. The third time she fell, she stayed down for a while. The snow was actually warm, in a way. Or rather, her body had stopped distinguishing between cold and warmth, which she knew from her herbalist training was the body beginning to shut down. Hypothermia, the blood retreating from the extremities to protect the vital organs. A slow, quiet surrender. She thought about staying, just lying here. The snow would cover her in an hour. By morning, she would be a shape under the white, and by spring, she would be grass and wildflowers, and no one in the grey mist pack would even notice she was gone. The root cellar would sit empty. Someone else would eventually find her mother's journal and use the pages for kindling. The moonflower box would dry out, and the seeds would die, and that would be the end of everything she had ever been. But she got up. She didn't know why. Some stubborn mechanism in her body that refused to agree with the logic of lying down. She got up and she walked, blind, freezing, bleeding from both shins where the rocks had torn the skin, stumbling through a world she could no longer see, leaving footprints in the snow that filled with blood before the wind erased them. She did not know that those footprints were being followed. 3 miles south, Kyle Ashbourne, Alpha King of the Ironvale Pack, stood at the edge of the tree line and watched the blizzard tear itself apart against the mountain. His wolves, 14 of them, crouched in the snow behind him. Every single one of them was blind. The blight had come to the Ironvale 2 weeks ago. His strongest hunters, wolves that had run with him through 3 wars and a decade of border disputes, were stumbling into walls and whimpering in their sleep. Their eyes had clouded over, milky white, sightless. They could still shift for now, but a blind wolf in winter was a dead wolf. They couldn't hunt. They couldn't fight. They couldn't run without crashing into trees and breaking their own legs. Kyle had tried everything. He had brought healers from 4 different packs. He had petitioned the Council of Alphas for aid, and received in return a long silence, followed by a message that amounted to good luck. He had even, in a moment of desperation that still burned in his chest like swallowed glass, gone to the witch on the eastern border and offered her anything at all, if she could cure his wolves. The witch had laughed. She had said, "The seer on the mountain made a cure once, 60 years ago. But it cost someone their eyes. Go ask the seer who's willing to go blind for your pack, Alpha King." No one had been willing. He had asked. He had stood before his pack, 200 wolves strong, the most feared fighting force north of the Iron River. And he had asked if anyone would give their sight to save their brothers and sisters. The silence that followed had been the loudest sound he had ever heard. So he had come north himself, not to the seer. He did not believe he had the right to ask someone to make that trade. But to the mountain, because the mountain was where the blight wolves had first appeared, and somewhere in these frozen peaks there might be a den, a nest, a source that could be destroyed. His beta, Torin, walked beside him. Torin was one of the few wolves still unaffected, his dark eyes sharp and worried beneath the fur-lined hood of his coat. "There are tracks," Torin said. Kael looked. He had already seen them. Boot prints. Small. A woman's or a child's. They came down from the upper slopes in a wandering, unsteady line, weaving back and forth across the path like the walker was drunk or injured or both. Every few dozen yards there was a depression in the snow where the walker had fallen. In 2 of those depressions there was blood. Not much, but enough. His wolf stirred. Deep in his chest, in the place where the beast lived, coiled around his spine like soak around a burning log, something shifted. His wolf lifted its head. Its nostrils flared. Kael stopped walking. The wind changed direction. It came down from the mountain now instead of across the valley, carrying snow and cold and something else. A scent. Faint. Almost lost in the overwhelming white noise of winter. But there, valerian, cold earth, the green, bitter thread of medicinal herbs, and underneath all of it, like a vein of gold running through granite, something warm, something that smelled like moonlight would smell if moonlight had a scent. Sweet and silver and achingly familiar, though he had never smelled it before in his life. His wolf lunged. Not physically, not yet, but inside him, the beast threw itself against the cage of his ribs with a force that made his breath catch. His vision sharpened. His heartbeat, which had been the slow, steady drum of an alpha at rest, accelerated to a hammering rhythm that he felt in his throat and his wrists and the soles of his feet. Mine. The word came from somewhere deeper than thought. It came from the wolf, from the bond, from the ancient contractual magic that had been woven into the DNA of their kind since before the first pack ran beneath the first moon. Mate. Kael's hands curled into fists at his sides. His claws, which he kept retracted out of long discipline, slid out and pierced the leather of his gloves. Torin was saying something. Kael couldn't hear him. The wind was roaring in his ears, or maybe that was his own blood, or maybe it was the wolf howling inside his skull with a joy so fierce it bordered on violence. He was running before he made the conscious decision to run. The snow didn't slow him. Nothing slowed him. He was the Alpha King of the Iron Vale, 6'4" and 240 pounds of muscle and scar tissue and barely contained wolf, and he covered the distance between the tree line and the first set of bloody footprints in a time that would have been impossible for a human and impressive even for a wolf. The tracks led uphill. Then they curved. Then they stopped making sense, wandering in a humid arc that doubled back on itself. The person making them couldn't see where they were going. That much was obvious. They were navigating by feel, by slope, by the direction of the wind, and they were failing. He found her 100 yards from the tree line, on her hands and knees in the snow. She was small. That was the first thing he noticed, not fragile. Small the way a blade is small, compact and purposeful, but clearly pushed far past the limits of what compact purposefulness could endure. Her coat was inadequate. Thin wool, patched at the elbows, no fur lining. Her hands were blue and red, and the knuckles were cracked and bleeding from where she had been using them to brace against the ground. Her dark hair was plastered to her face by snow and sweat, and it hung in uneven lengths, as if someone had once hacked at it carelessly. She was facing away from him. She hadn't heard him approach, or if she hadn't reacted. She was trying to stand. Her legs kept folding under her. She would get halfway up, her knees locked, her arms out to the sides for balance, and then she would sway and go down again. He got closer, close enough to see the blood soaking through the legs of her worn trousers where the rocks had torn the skin. Close enough to see the trembling in her shoulders that wasn't cold, that was exhaustion so profound it had become a kind of permanent vibration, like a wire stretched to its breaking point. Close enough to smell her properly. The scent hit him like a wall. Valerian and cold earth and herbs and moonlight. Yes, all of that. But also her. The bass note beneath all the surface smells. Skin and warmth and something that his wolf recognized with an absolute certainty that bypassed every rational thought he had ever had. This was the scent his wolf had been searching for in every room, on every wind, in every crowd for 32 years. This was the scent that meant home. She fell again. This time, she didn't try to get up. She just lay there in the snow, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that he could see condensing in the cold air. And she made a sound. Not a cry. Not a whimper. A laugh. A small, broken exhalation of something that might have been amusement at the absurdity of dying 100 yards from the tree line after surviving everything else. He knelt beside her. He pulled off his coat, the heavy wolf fur one, the one lined with the pelts of 3 grey wolves he had killed in single combat, and he laid it over her. The coat was enormous on her. It covered her like a blanket. She flinched. Her hands came up, defensive. Her face turned toward him, and he saw her eyes. They were open. They were beautiful. Dark grey, the color of storm clouds over winter water. And they were empty. The pupils were fixed, dilated, staring at nothing. A thin band of silver light seemed to circle each iris, fading even as he watched, like the last glow of embers dying in a hearth. She couldn't see him. She couldn't see anything. "Who's there?" she said. Her voice was hoarse, scraped raw by cold and exhaustion. But underneath the damage there was a quality to it that made his wolf go very still. A steadiness, a refusal to panic that spoke of someone who had been frightened so many times that fear itself had worn smooth inside her. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were ice against his palm. His wolf growled, not at her, but at everything that had brought her to this point. At the thin coat and the broken boots and the bloody shins and the empty eyes and the fact that someone, somewhere, had let her walk into a blizzard alone. "I've got you," he said. His voice came out lower than he intended. Rougher. The wolf was too close to the surface, pressing against his vocal cords, turning his words into something halfway between speech and growl. She tried to pull her hand back. He didn't let her. "Who are you?" she said. Not a question exactly. More of a demand. Even now, even blind and freezing and collapsed in the snow, she wasn't willing to be passive about her own survival. Something in his chest cracked open. Not broke. Cracked, the way ice cracks in spring, revealing the dark, rushing water beneath. "Kael," he said. "Kael Ashbourne. I'm the Alpha of the Iron Veil." Her reaction was immediate and wrong. She didn't relax. She tensed. Every muscle in her small body went rigid under his coat, and her hand in his went from merely cold to actively trying to escape. "Let go of me," she said. "No, I mean it. Let go, I can't. I don't belong to any pack. I'm just an herb keeper. An omega. I'm no one." Please. The please almost destroyed him. It was the please of someone who had learned, through years of specific experience, that powerful wolves were not safe, that alphas meant pain, that the only defense available to someone at the bottom of every hierarchy was to make themselves so small and so worthless that the blow, when it came, might land somewhere less vital. "Who hurt you?" he said. She stopped struggling. The question had caught her off guard. She wasn't used to being asked. He could see it in the way her brow creased, in the way her mouth opened and closed without producing sound, as if the question itself was in a language she had to translate. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "It matters to me." "Why?" "Because you are mine." The words left his mouth before he could consider them, before he could soften them or frame them in a way that wouldn't terrify a blind, freezing Omega who had clearly spent her entire life being treated as disposable. They came out hot and certain and irrevocable, the way a door sounds when it closes behind you in a room you can never leave. She went very still. Her empty eyes moved, searching for him in the darkness behind them. Her lips, cracked and blue from the cold, parted slightly. "I don't—" "What?" "You're my mate." He said it plainly because there was no other way to say it. The bond doesn't lie. I can feel it. My wolf can feel it. You can feel it too, even if you don't know what it is yet. "I can't feel anything," she said. "My feet are numb, despite everything, despite the cold and the blood and the impossibility of the situation." He laughed. It surprised him. He hadn't laughed in weeks, not since the blight had come and his wolves had started going blind and the weight of an entire kingdom had settled on his shoulders like a yoke made of iron. She heard the laugh. Her head tilted. Something changed in her expression, so subtle he would have missed it if he hadn't been staring at her face like it contained the answer to every question he had ever failed to ask. The defensive tension in her jaw eased by a fraction, just a fraction, but it was enough. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I've been trying." "Then stop trying." He slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, and he lifted her. She weighed nothing. Or rather, she weighed something. But he was an alpha king whose wolf was currently flooding his muscles with approximately twice the normal amount of adrenaline because his mate was injured and cold and blind, and every cell in his body was screaming at him to fix it. "Put me down," she said. But her hands had already found the collar of his shirt, and her fingers were gripping the fabric with a strength that contradicted her words. "Where's your pack?" he asked. "Where do you live?" "Greymeist," she said. "South of the river crossing." "But You can't take me back there." "Why?" "Because they won't want me back. Because I was only useful as an herb keeper, and now I can't." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "Now I can't see," she finished. He held her closer. The snow was falling on both of them, on his bare shoulders and her dark hair, and the fur coat wrapped around her like a cocoon. His wolves, the 14 blind ones and Torin, had caught up. They stood in a ragged circle, some in wolf form and some in human form, their sightless eyes turned toward their alpha, and the woman he held as though they could sense, even without vision, that something fundamental had shifted. Torin stepped forward. His eyes went from Kael to the woman and back. The beta's face did something complicated, passing through surprise and understanding, and then settling on something that looked dangerously close to relief. "She's your mate," Torin said. "Not a question." "She's my mate," Kael confirmed. "She's blind," Torin said. "I noticed. Alpha, the wolves. Later. We'll deal with everything later. Right now we're getting her warm." He turned south. The woman in his arms, this small, fierce herb keeper who had traded her eyes for something he didn't yet understand, pressed her face against his chest. He could feel her breath through his shirt, warm and shallow, and gradually deepening as his body heat seeped into her frozen skin. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elara," she said into his collarbone. "Elara Voss, Elara." He said it twice, the second time silently, just the shape of it in his mouth. His wolf memorized it the way a wolf memorizes the layout of its territory. Permanently. "Elara," he said out loud, "why are you blind?" She didn't answer for a long time. He walked. The snow crunched under his boots, and the wind pushed against his back, and his wolves followed in a staggered line. The blind ones guided by Torin and the two-sighted scouts who had joined them that morning. "I traded my eyes," she said finally. "To the seer on the mountain." He stopped walking. "You what?" She traded her eyes. Torin's voice was flat. The beta had heard it too. "There's a blight," Elara said. Her voice was clearer now, steadier, as though warmth was restoring something that the cold had stripped away. "It's been spreading through the northern packs, a sickness carried by blight wolves from the ashlands. It blinds the wolves first, then takes their ability to shift. They starve. The seer had a cure, but the cure requires sight, living sight. Someone had to give their eyes so the cure could be brewed. And you volunteered," Kael said. There was no one else. The words landed between them with the weight of something falling from a great height. Kael looked down at the woman in his arms, at her closed eyes with their thin rings of fading silver, at the cracked hands and the inadequate coat and the blood on her shins. She had walked into a blizzard alone, climbed a mountain, bargained away her sight to save wolves who had never been anything but cruel to her, and then tried to walk home in the dark, without telling anyone. Without anyone noticing she was gone. His wolf made a sound inside him that he had never heard it make before. It was not a growl or a howl. It was a keen, a long, low note of recognition and anguish and a possessiveness so total that it transcended the merely physical and became something closer to devotion. "My wolves," he said. His voice was not entirely his own. The wolf was speaking through him, the way the wolf sometimes did when the emotion was too large for human words. "My wolves are among the blinded." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "The cure will reach them," the seer promised. "Mountain ravens. 3 days. 3 days." He started walking again. Faster now. His wolves felt the change in pace and adjusted, Torin murmuring directions to the blind ones, the scouts ranging ahead to clear the path. "You saved my wolves," Kael said. "You saved my pack. And you don't even know us." "I'm an herb keeper," Elara said. "It's what I do." "No," he said. "Herb keepers make poultices and teas. You gave your eyes. That's something else entirely." She said nothing, but her grip on his collar tightened. They reached the Iron Vale camp at dusk. It was not a permanent settlement, but a war camp, the kind Kael's wolves erected when they traveled, efficient and disciplined. 8 large canvas tents arranged in a defensive circle around a central fire pit. The fire was burning high, fed by wolves who had been left behind to guard the camp, and the heat of it reached them 50 yards out. Elara turned her face toward it, sensing the warmth the way a plant turns toward sunlight. Kael carried her into his tent. It was the largest, set back from the fire, but well heated by a portable iron stove that his quartermaster maintained with the fanatical dedication of someone who understood that an alpha's tent was a tactical asset. The interior smelled of wood smoke and oiled leather and the cedar shavings that lined the floor. He set her down on his cot. She sat upright, her hands moving over the blankets, orienting herself by touch. The fur coat was still wrapped around her, and she pulled it tighter, though the tent was warm enough that sweat had already begun to bead on Kael's bare shoulders. "I need to look at your legs," he said. "I'm fine. You're bleeding through your trousers." "I've bled before." He knelt in front of her. She flinched at the sound of his knees hitting the cedar shavings, then held still, her jaw set, her empty eyes fixed on a point somewhere above his head. "I'm going to roll up your trouser legs," he said. "I'm going to clean the cuts. If you tell me to stop, I'll stop." She said nothing, which he took as consent. The cuts on her shins were ugly, but not deep. Rock abrasions, the skin torn in ragged patches, dirt and ice crystals embedded in the raw tissue. He cleaned them with water heated on the stove and a cloth that he tore from his own shirt because it was cleaner than the medical supplies in the camp kit. His hands, which could crush a human skull without effort, moved with a gentleness that would have astonished anyone who had ever seen him in combat. She sat still through all of it. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. But her hands, resting on the cot on either side of her thighs, were white-knuckled. "How long have you been an herb keeper?" he asked. Not because he needed to know, because he could see that she needed something to focus on that wasn't his hands on her damaged skin. "Since I was 14. My mother was the herb keeper before me." "Where is your mother?" "Dead. Lung rot. 9 years ago." "And your father?" "Never knew him. My mother didn't talk about him." There was a pause. She said he was from another pack, that it was complicated, that I shouldn't ask. Kael filed this away. A father from another pack. Complicated. A mother who wouldn't explain. It meant something. He didn't know what yet, but his wolf was paying attention, ears forward, alert. He finished cleaning the cuts and wrapped them with strips of clean linen. Then he brought her water and dried meat and a heel of dark bread that the camp cook had baked that morning. She ate with the focused concentration of someone who had learned to eat whenever food was available, because it might not be available again soon. He watched her. He couldn't stop watching her. Now that the worst of the cold had been chased from her skin, now that the blood had been cleaned and the shaking had subsided to an occasional tremor, he could see her clearly. Not just the damage and the deprivation, but the architecture beneath it. The strong jaw, the high cheekbones, the way her hair, drying now in the heat of the stove, was not the dull brown he had first assumed, but a deep auburn shot through with strands of something lighter. Copper, maybe. Or gold. Her eyes were the worst and the best part of looking at her. They were still beautiful. The storm-grey irises, the dark lashes, the expressiveness of the brow above them. But they were still. They didn't track. They didn't focus. They stared at the same fixed nothing, regardless of where she turned her head, and the fading silver rings around each iris were dimmer now than they had been an hour ago, barely visible in the lamplight. He wanted to destroy something. Specifically, he wanted to find the seer on the mountain and demand that she undo whatever she had done. And if the seer refused, he wanted to tear the mountain apart with his bare hands until he found a way to give Elara her sight back. But he couldn't. The trade had been made. The cure was being brewed. 2,000 wolves would see again, because this one woman had decided that their lives were worth more than her eyes. "There's something I need to tell you," Elara said. She had finished eating. Her hands were wrapped around the tin cup of water, and she held it the way you hold something when you need to hold something, not because you're thirsty, but because your hands need an anchor. He sat across from her on the camp chair and waited. "The cure I gave my eyes for. It's for a blight that's hit the northern packs. Your wolves." She hesitated. "Your wolves are among the afflicted, aren't they?" "Yes, I could smell it on them." when you carried me past. The sickness has a smell. Burnt almonds and wet stone. I've been smelling it for weeks in my own pack. You can smell the blight. I can smell most things. Better than most wolves, actually. My mother said I had a nose like a lunar wolf. She said it as though that was something to be ashamed of. Another piece of information filed away. Another thread that tugged at something in the back of his mind. Lunar wolves. A rare bloodline. Nearly extinct. Said to have senses that surpassed even alpha wolves, and other gifts besides. Gifts that surfaced only under specific conditions. He was beginning to understand that the woman sitting on his cot was not merely an herb keeper. When morning came, Kael sent Torin south with a message for the Grey Mist pack. The message was simple and direct, as Kael's messages tended to be. It said, "Your herb keeper is alive. She is under the protection of the Iron Veil Crown. Any claim your pack holds on her is hereby dissolved. If you dispute this, bring your alpha to the Iron Bridge at the next full moon, and we can discuss it." Torin, who had served Kael for 12 years, and who could read the subtext of his alpha's communications the way a cartographer reads terrain, raised an eyebrow. "You're dissolving her pack bond by royal decree," Torin said. "She doesn't have a pack bond. She has an obligation. There's a difference. Her alpha might see it otherwise. Her alpha let her sleep in a root cellar, and didn't notice when she walked into a blizzard to trade her eyes away. If her alpha wants to discuss it, I'll be happy to educate him on the difference between an alpha and a warden." Torin left. Kael returned to his tent and found Elara standing. She had folded the blankets on the cot with military precision, and she was running her hands along the tent wall, mapping the space. Her movements were careful, but not hesitant. She moved like someone who had already begun the process of rebuilding her internal model of the world without vision. "I can hear you breathing," she said, without turning around. "You breathe differently than anyone else here. Deeper. And there's a sound underneath it. Like a low hum. Is that your wolf? You can hear my wolf? It's not subtle." She turned. Her empty eyes found his general direction, with an accuracy that was slightly unnerving. "It sounds angry." "It's not angry. It's—" he searched for the word. "Attentive." She made a sound that might have been skepticism. The days that followed were strange and difficult, and saturated with a tension that Kael had no framework for managing. He was accustomed to problems that could be solved with force, or strategy, or the application of overwhelming authority. The problem of Elara could not be solved with any of these things. She was his mate. His wolf was certain of it. The bond was there, a physical sensation in his chest, a thread of heat connecting him to her that stretched but never broke, regardless of distance. When she was near, his wolf was calm in a way it had never been calm, like a lake that had been storm-tossed for years, suddenly going still. When she was away from him, even across the camp, the wolf paced and snarled and pushed against his control with an urgency that bordered on pain. But she wouldn't accept it, not because she denied the bond. She couldn't deny it. She felt it, too. He could see it in the way she turned toward him when he entered a room, in the way her hands stilled when he spoke, in the flush that crept up her neck when he stood close enough for her to feel his body heat. But she wouldn't accept it because she believed, with a conviction that was harder than stone, and had been forged over years of specific daily cruelties, that she was not worthy of it. "I'm blind," she said on the second day, when he brought her food and sat with her and tried to explain what the bond meant. "I'm an Omega. I have no wolf. I have no family. I have no pack. I have nothing to offer you. You're a king. You need a Luna who can see, who can fight, who can give you strong pups and stand beside you at council and not trip over her own feet walking across a room. She did trip sometimes, not often, but enough. The camp was unfamiliar territory, and she was still mapping it, and occasionally she would miscalculate a distance or miss a rope peg and stumble. Each time it happened, a flash of something moved across her face. Not embarrassment exactly, more like confirmation. "See?" her expression said. "See what I am?" He hated it. He hated the way she flinched when his wolves came too close. He hated the careful way she ate, as though the food might be taken away at any moment. He hated the way she slept curled into a ball at the very edge of the cot, taking up as little space as possible, as though even unconscious she was trying not to be a burden. On the third morning, a mountain raven arrived. It carried a small glass vial sealed with wax, and inside the vial was a liquid the color of old silver. The cure. Kael took the vial to his blinded wolves. There were 14 of them. He administered the cure himself, a single drop in each sightless eye, and he watched as the milky film dissolved like frost on glass. One by one, his wolves blinked and squinted, and then opened their eyes wide, and the sounds they made when the world came back to them were sounds he would carry in his memory for the rest of his life. The last wolf to receive the cure was a young scout named Dael, barely 19, who had gone blind a week before and who had spent every day since sitting in the corner of his tent with his knees drawn to his chest, silent. When the cure took hold and Dael's eyes cleared, the boy looked at Kael and said, I can see the fire. Alpha, I can see." Kael put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said nothing, because there was nothing adequate to say. Then he took the vial and walked back to his tent, where Elara was sitting on the cot with her hands folded in her lap, and he knelt in front of her and said, "There's cure left, enough for 2 more drops." She was quiet for a long time. "It won't work on me," she said. "How do you know?" "Because the seer told me. The trade is permanent. The cure restores sight that was taken by the blight." "My sight wasn't taken. It was given." "There's a difference." He looked at the vial in his hand. Then he looked at her eyes, storm grey and silver-ringed and empty. "Let me try," he said. She shook her head. "Use it on someone who needs it. There are other packs, other wolves, still blinded. Don't waste it on something that can't be fixed." He put the vial in his coat pocket. He would send it to the next afflicted pack. She was probably right, but the weight of the vial against his chest felt like an accusation, and his wolf howled with a grief that shook the bars of its cage. That afternoon, a delegation arrived from the Grey Mist pack. Kael heard them before he saw them, wolves moving through the forest, making more noise than they should have been making, which meant they were either undisciplined or wanted to be heard. Probably both. There were 6 of them, 5 warriors, and a man who walked in front like he owned the ground beneath his feet. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with a handsome face going to fat at the jaw and eyes that were the pale blue of shallow water. He wore expensive leathers and a silver chain that marked him as Alpha Garrett of the Grey Mist pack. Kael had heard of him. Mid-range pack, decent territory, unremarkable leadership. The kind of alpha who maintained power through tradition and the absence of better alternatives, rather than through any particular strength or vision. Beside him walked a younger man, mid-20s, same pale blue eyes, same thickening jaw. His mouth was set in a smirk that looked permanent, as though his face had been designed around it. He smelled of cedar oil and entitlement. That would be the son, Callum, the one who had held Elara down and cut her hair. Kael's wolf began to growl. Not inside. Outside. The sound rose from his chest and vibrated through the camp like a physical force, making the canvas of the tents ripple and the fire in the pit flare sideways. Torrin appeared at his shoulder. "Easy," the beta murmured. "Alpha Ashborn," Garrett said. He stopped at the edge of the camp and executed a bow that was technically correct, but lacked any real deference. "I received your message regarding our herb keeper." "She's not your herb keeper," Kael said. Garrett blinked. "With respect, Alpha, she is a member of my pack. She was born in our territory, raised under our protection, and she has obligations to our community that—" "What obligations?" Kael stepped forward. He was taller than Garrett by 4 inches and broader by a significant margin, and his wolf was pressing against his skin hard enough that his eyes had gone from dark brown to molten gold. "What obligations does a woman have to a pack that housed her in a root cellar? That fed her scraps? That let a boy cut her hair like she was a sheep being shorn?" He saw it then. A flicker of something in Garrett's eyes. Not guilt exactly. Awareness. The awareness of a man who had known, on some level, that what was happening under his watch was wrong, but who had chosen the path of least resistance, which was to not know, to look away, to maintain the hierarchy because maintaining the hierarchy was easier than confronting it. And then the moment passed, and Garrett's face smoothed over, and he said, "The Omega is valued by our pack. She has skills that are difficult to replace." Skills, Kael tasted the word and found it bitter. "She gave her eyes so your wolves could see again." "Did you know that?" Garrett's composure cracked. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "She—" "What?" "The blight cure. The seer on the mountain required a sacrifice. Living sight. Your herb keeper walked into a blizzard and climbed a mountain and traded her vision so that every blinded wolf in the northern territories could hunt again. Your wolves. My wolves. Every pack the blight has touched. She paid for all of it. And you didn't even know she was gone." The silence that followed was not the silence of shame. It was the silence of a man calculating. Kael watched it happen, watched Garrett's eyes narrow and his jaw work and his hands, which had been open at his sides, curl slowly into fists. And Kael understood that the grey mist Alpha was not ashamed. He was angry. Not at himself, at Alara, for making him look bad, for acting without permission, for having the audacity to be important in a way that he could not control or claim credit for. Callum, standing behind his father, broke the silence. His smirk had widened. "The little mouse did something brave for once," Callum said. "That's cute, but she still belongs to us. Pack law is clear. An Omega doesn't get to walk away because she did one useful thing." Kael moved. He crossed the distance between himself and Callum in 2 strides, which was 1 stride more than strictly necessary, but which he used for the purposes of letting Callum watch him coming and understand, in the long second it took for the Alpha King to close the gap, exactly how outmatched he was. Kael's hand closed around Callum's throat. Not squeezing, just holding. The way you hold a glass you're deciding whether to drink from or shatter. "Say that again," Kael said. His voice was the quietest thing in the camp and the most dangerous. Callum made a sound. It was not words. His pale blue eyes were very wide, and his hands had come up to grip Kael's wrist, but they couldn't move it, couldn't budge it, because Kael's arm was locked like an iron bar, and the force required to move it was approximately 4 times what Callum's panicking body could produce. "Alpha Ashborn," Garrett said. His voice had gone thin. Release my son. Your son cut a girl's hair while she was held in the mud. Kael's gold eyes moved to Garrett. Your son called her a mouse. Your son and your pack treated a woman of immeasurable value as something less than a stray dog, and now you come to my camp and you tell me she belongs to you. He released Callum. The young wolf staggered backward, coughing, his hand at his throat where the imprints of Kael's fingers were already rising in red against his pale skin. She is my mate, Kael said. The word dropped into the space between them like a lit torch into dry grass. Garrett's face went through several changes in rapid succession. Surprise, disbelief, calculation. And then finally, something that looked almost like avarice. If the Grey Mist Pack's Omega was the mate of the Alpha King of the Iron Vale, then the Grey Mist Pack had a connection to the most powerful pack in the north. Alliances, resources, protection. The Omega was no longer worthless. The Omega was a bridge. Of course, Garrett said, and his voice was warm now, performatively warm, the way a salesman's voice goes warm when the customer reaches for their wallet. Of course, we would never stand in the way of a fated bond. Elara has always been valued by our pack. We raised her, cared for her. If she has found her mate in the Alpha King, then the Grey Mist Pack could not be more pleased. No, said Elara. She had come out of the tent. No one had heard her approach. She stood in the entrance with Kael's fur coat wrapped around her shoulders, and her blind eyes pointed at the general vicinity of Garrett's voice, and the expression on her face was not the expression of an Omega. It was not meek. It was not accommodating. It was the expression of someone who had been pushed past the furthest edge of tolerance, and had found, on the other side, a quality of anger that was quiet and precise and absolutely immovable. You did not care for me, she said to Garrett. You did not raise me. My mother raised me until she died in your pack infirmary, while your pack healer played cards in the next room, because treating an Omega's lung rot was not worth missing his turn. After that, I raised myself, in a cellar, eating what was left over, wearing what was thrown away. I kept your herbs, I made your medicines, I treated your sick and your wounded, and I did it for 9 years, and you never once said my name without needing something from me. She paused. Her chest was moving with the effort of controlling her breathing. You are not pleased for me, she continued. You are pleased for yourself. You are standing there right now, calculating what my bond to the Alpha King is worth to your pack. I can't see your face, but I can hear your heartbeat. It's faster than it was a minute ago. You're excited. Not for me. For the Alliance. Garrett said nothing. His heartbeat, which Elara had correctly identified as accelerated, hammered visibly in the vein at his temple. Callum stepped forward. His throat was still red. His eyes were bright with a resentment that had been there long before today, a resentment aimed specifically at Elara, at her existence, at her refusal to be the nothing he needed her to be. You ungrateful little... he began. Finish that sentence, Kael said from behind him, and I will break every bone in your hand, starting with the fingers that held the knife. Callum's mouth closed. Then something happened that Elara didn't expect. Garrett's shoulders dropped. The performance fell away from his face like a mask slipping from its hooks, and what was underneath was not anger or avarice or calculation. It was tiredness. Your mother, Garrett said quietly. Elara's head turned. Your mother was... He stopped. Started again. Sarah was the best herb keeper the Grey Mist Pack ever had. She came to us from the south. She never said where exactly. She never said who your father was. I asked her. Once. Just once. She looked at me, and she said, "If I tell you, they will come for her." The camp was very quiet. The fire cracked and popped. Snow sifted down from the canvas overhead. "I didn't care for you the way I should have," Garrett said, "after Sarah died. I let the pack treat you the way they wanted, and I told myself it was because you were an Omega, and that was how things were. But the truth is, I was afraid. Your mother was afraid of something, and her fear became my fear. And I thought if I kept you small, if I kept you invisible, whatever she was hiding you from wouldn't find you." He looked at Kyle. His pale blue eyes were wet. "I was wrong," he said. "I know that now. I've known it for years. But knowing it and doing something about it turned out to be two different things, and I chose the easier one. Every day for 9 years, I chose the easier one." Silence. Elara's throat worked. Her blind eyes glistened. "That doesn't make it right," she said. "No," Garrett agreed. "It doesn't." He turned to go. Then he stopped and said over his shoulder, without looking at her, "Your mother's herb journal. The one you keep under the loose stone. She wrote it in 2 languages. The one you can read and one you can't. The one you can't is lunar script. I don't know what it says. I think it's time you found someone who does." The Grey Mist delegation left. Callum went with them, his hand at his throat, his smirk gone, replaced by something smaller and harder that would calcify over the years into a grudge he would carry like a stone in his shoe. But that was a problem for later. Kyle found Elara sitting by the fire pit. She had removed herself from the tent and made her way to the fire alone, navigating by heat and sound with an accuracy that was improving hour by hour. The fur coat pooled around her on the log she had chosen as a seat, and the firelight played across her face, catching the high cheekbones, the strong jaw, the auburn hair that burned copper and gold in the warm light. He sat down beside her. Not too close. Close enough that she could feel his presence without feeling crowded. "Lunar script," she said. "Yes, my mother was a lunar wolf. It seems likely. And if she was a lunar wolf, then I'm half, at least. Maybe more. It depends on your father." She turned her face toward the fire. The heat made her blind eyes water, or maybe it wasn't the heat. "Lunar wolves are supposed to be extinct," she said. "Supposed to be isn't the same as actually are. If anyone finds out what I am, then they'll have to get through me. And my pack. And 200 wolves who can see again because of what you did." He paused. "You're not alone anymore, Elara. I know you don't believe that, yet. I know trust is something you've never had reason to learn. But I'm here. I'm not going away. And my wolf is absolutely certain about you, even if the rest of you hasn't caught up yet." She reached out. Her hand found his knee first, then traveled up his arm to his shoulder, reading him by touch the way she read her herbs. Her fingers found the scar on his collarbone, a thick rope of raised tissue from a blade that had come within an inch of his throat years ago. She traced it without speaking. "How many scars do you have?" she asked. "More than I've counted, so we match," she said. Her mouth curved. It was not quite a smile, but it was in the neighborhood, and his wolf reacted to it with an intensity that was embarrassing. The days stretched into weeks. The camp became a temporary home, and then something more permanent, as winter deepened and travel became inadvisable. Kyle sent word to the Iron Vale stronghold that he would be delayed and received in return a diplomatically worded message from his council that amounted to "Please come back. Everything is on fire without you. But also congratulations on finding your mate." Elara learned the camp the way she had learned the Grey Mist settlement, through repetition and memory, and the extraordinary sensitivity of her remaining senses. Within a week, she could navigate from the tent to the fire pit to the supply wagons without assistance. Within 2 weeks, she had organized the camp's modest medical supplies, identified 3 herbs growing wild within walking distance that no one else had noticed, and treated a wolf's infected bite wound with a poultice that healed it in 2 days when the camp healer's methods had been failing for a week. The camp healer, a gruff older wolf named Declan, watched her work with an expression that started as skepticism and ended as something very close to awe. "She's making medicine blind," Declan said to Kyle one evening, "by smell and touch, and she's better at it than I am with both eyes working." Kyle was not surprised. His wolf had known from the first moment, from the first breath of her scent on the winter wind, that this woman was extraordinary. The world was simply taking its time catching up. But the bond between them remained unclaimed. Elara slept in his tent because he refused to let her sleep elsewhere, and she had reluctantly accepted that arguing with an alpha king about sleeping arrangements was a war of attrition she would lose. But she slept on the cot, and he slept on the floor, and the distance between them, 4 feet of cedar shavings and cold air, felt like a canyon. She was afraid. Not of him specifically, but of what accepting the bond would mean. She had spent her entire life being disposable, being claimed, being chosen, being someone's. These concepts existed for her only as abstract ideas encountered in stories told by other people about lives that happened to other people. The idea that the Alpha King of the Iron Veil Pack wanted her, specifically, permanently, with the full weight of the mate bond behind it, was so far outside the architecture of her experience that she couldn't make it fit. It was like trying to put a cathedral inside a cellar. He didn't push. He wanted to. His wolf wanted to. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to claim her, to mark her, to make the bond irrevocable so that she could never doubt it again. But he could feel, through the bond, the texture of her fear. It was not the fear of someone who didn't want to be caught. It was the fear of someone who did want to be caught, and was terrified of what would happen if she let herself want it, and it turned out to be temporary. So he waited. He brought her food. He sat with her by the fire. He told her about his pack, his stronghold, the vast territory that the Iron Veil controlled, the wars he had fought, and the peace he was trying to build. He told her about his wolves, about Dael the young scout, and Torin the stoic beta, and Maren the elderly cook, who made a venison stew so bad that wolves had been known to volunteer for scouting missions just to avoid dinner. She laughed at that. A real laugh, sudden and bright, and the sound of it rearranged something inside his chest in a way that could not be undone. He learned her, too. He learned that she hummed when she worked, low, tuneless melodies that she wasn't aware of making. He learned that she sorted her herbs by smell in a sequence that only she understood, but that was internally consistent and brilliantly efficient. He learned that she talked to plants, not in the whimsical way that some people talk to plants, with baby voices and silly names, but in a practical conversational tone, as though the plants were colleagues whose cooperation she required and whose opinions she respected. He learned that she was brave in a way that had nothing to do with physical courage, the kind of bravery that exists only in people who have been afraid for so long that they have developed a working relationship with their fear, who carry it like a weight they have learned to walk with rather than a wall they cannot pass. And he learned gradually about her power. It started small. She was treating one of his wolves, a female warrior named Rhea, who had taken a deep cut to her forearm during a training exercise. Elara cleaned the wound and applied a poultice and wrapped it, all standard herb keeper procedures, all done by touch with the kind of confident efficiency that comes from years of practice. But when she pulled her hands away from the wrapped wound, the bandages glowed. Not brightly, not the way things glow in stories, with dramatic silver light and gasping bystanders. Faintly, a dim phosphorescence, barely visible in daylight, like the luminescence of certain mushrooms that grow in deep caves. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, and then faded. Ria's wound healed in 6 hours, not 6 days. 6 hours. When the bandages were removed, the skin beneath was smooth and pink and new, as though the cut had happened weeks ago instead of that morning. Elara didn't know she had done it. She couldn't see the glow. Ria described it to her, and Elara's face went very still and very careful, and she said, "That's not possible." But it was possible. It happened again. And again. Each time Elara touched a wound with the intention of healing, the faint glow appeared, and the healing accelerated far beyond what any herb or poultice could account for. "Lunar blood," Torin said to Kael in private. "The old stories say lunar wolves could heal with their hands, that their blood carried moonlight, and their touch could mend what was broken." "She doesn't know what she is," Kael said. "Then someone needs to tell her. Because if the wrong people find out before she understands what she can do, they won't come asking politely." The wrong people came on a Tuesday. Elara was in the medical tent, organizing dried herbs into cloth sachets by smell. She had developed a system involving different knot patterns on the drawstrings to identify the contents, and she was explaining this system to Declan with the patient condescension of someone who has been explaining obvious things to reluctant learners for years when the camp alarm sounded. It was not a horn or a bell. It was a howl. Specifically, it was Torin's howl, the beta's voice rising from the perimeter in a long ascending note that meant not threat but hostile, numerous, armed. Elara's head came up. Her hands went still. She could hear, beyond the howl, the sound of many feet moving through snow, the clink of metal, the rasp of leather, the collective breathing of wolves approaching in formation. "Declan," she said. "How many?" The camp healer was already at the tent flap, looking out. 50, he said. "Maybe 60. They're wearing black. All of them. And there's a woman at the front, tall, red hair. She looks like she's in charge, and she looks angry." Elara's stomach dropped. She didn't need to see the woman to know who it was. She could smell her, even from inside the tent. Jasmine and cold steel and something acidic, something that burned at the back of the throat like bile. "Serana Voss," Elara said. "Your name is Voss," Declan said. "She's my aunt." The woman who walked into the Iron Veil camp like she owned it was everything Elara's mother had been and wasn't. Tall where Sarah had been small. Sharp where Sarah had been gentle. Beautiful in a way that was architectural rather than warm. All clean lines and precise angles, with hair the color of arterial blood and eyes the deep amber of a wolf in full predatory focus. Serana Voss had been looking for her niece for 23 years. She had not been looking out of love. The lunar wolves were not extinct. They were hidden, scattered across the northern territories in ones and twos, concealed within ordinary packs under false names, their bloodline masked by careful mating choices and deliberate obscurity. They had gone underground a generation ago, when the Ashland Council had declared lunar blood too dangerous to exist uncontrolled and had begun systematically hunting those who carried it. Sarah Voss had run. She had taken her infant daughter and fled south and buried herself in the most unremarkable pack she could find. And she had lived there quietly for 14 years, keeping herbs, raising her child, telling no one, until the lung rot had taken her and she had died with the secret still locked behind her teeth. Sorana had not run. Sorana had fought. She had gathered the remaining lunar wolves under her banner, had trained them, armed them, and had positioned herself as their leader, their protector, their queen. But Sorana's protection came with conditions. Every lunar wolf owed their bloodline to the collective. Every ability, every gift, every drop of moonlight in their veins belonged to Sorana's cause. And Elara, the daughter of the sister who had run, was the strongest of them. Sorana had known it from the reports that had begun filtering out of the north. A blind herb keeper whose touch could heal. A woman who had given her eyes to save thousands, and whose blood still glowed with the light of a moon she could no longer see. Sorana wanted that power, not Elara. The power. Kael met her at the edge of the camp. He was in human form, but barely. His eyes were gold, his claws out. His shoulders rolled forward in the predatory hunch that his wolves knew meant the alpha was one wrong word away from shifting. "You're in my territory," he said. Sorana smiled. It was a beautiful smile. It was also empty, the way a polished knife is beautiful and empty, all surface and edge with nothing warm behind it. "Alpha King," she said. Her voice was low, cultured, precise. "I've come for my niece." "You're not taking her anywhere. She's lunar blood. She belongs with her own kind, with people who understand what she is and can teach her to use her gifts." Sorana's amber eyes moved past Kael to the camp behind him. "You have no idea what she's capable of. None of you do. She could heal entire packs with a touch. She could cure blights, mend broken bonds, restore wolves who have lost their ability to shift. She is the most valuable living thing in the Northern Territories, and you have her sorting herbs in a tent." Kael's growl deepened. "She's not a thing. She's a person. My mate." Sorana's smile didn't waver. "Mates are a convenient fiction. Biology dressed up as destiny. Your wolf wants her because she smells good. That's not love. That's chemistry." She stepped forward, one step. Kael didn't step back. "I can offer her purpose," Sorana said. "Belonging. A place among people who share her blood. Can you offer her that? Can you offer a blind lunar wolf a home in a pack of fighters and warriors who will spend their lives protecting a woman they see as fragile? She will be your weakness, Alpha King. Every enemy you have will know it. Every threat will come through her. Is that the life you want for your mate?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Kael felt the truth of it in his bones, the way you feel the truth of a blow before it lands. Sorana was not wrong. Not entirely. Every word she said was logical and reasonable and built on foundations of genuine concern for a real problem. But his wolf heard something else. His wolf heard the way Sorana said "my niece," the way Garrett had said "our herb keeper." Possessive, utilitarian. The same careful cataloguing of value that had kept Elara in a cellar for 9 years. "She's not yours to take," Kael said, "and she's not yours to keep. She's mine to protect." He stepped forward now, closing the distance between them, and the authority that poured off him was not the authority of a man who held a title, but the authority of a wolf who had earned his throne through blood and bone and the unflinching willingness to stand between his pack and anything that threatened it. "And I will protect her, from the Ashland Council, from the Blight, from you, from anyone who sees her as a resource instead of a person. I will fight every wolf in the Northern Territories if I have to. I will burn every stronghold. I will tear down every throne, including my own, before I let anyone take her from me. Serana looked at him. For a long moment, the mask slipped. Beneath the political calculation and the weaponized beauty and the architecture of her ambition, there was something else. Something raw. She looked, for just a moment, like a woman who had been fighting alone for a very long time, and who was very, very tired of it. My sister died alone, Serana said quietly, in a pack that didn't even bother to treat her illness. She died hiding. She died afraid. And the only thing she left behind was a girl who doesn't even know what she is. Then help me change that, Kyle said. Not by taking her, not by using her, by telling her the truth, all of it, and then letting her decide. Serana's jaw tightened. Her amber eyes glistened. Then the mask came back, smooth and seamless as a door closing, and she nodded once. Bring me to her, she said. What followed was not a conversation Elara had been prepared for. She sat in Kael's tent, with the fur coat around her shoulders, and her blind eyes fixed on the sound of Serana's voice, and she listened to the truth of what she was. Luna Wolf, daughter of a bloodline that had existed since before the Packs, since before the Alphas, since before the moon itself had chosen to bind wolf and human together in the same skin. The Luna Wolves had been the first, the original wolves. Their blood carried the essence of the bond itself, the raw material of connection and healing and transformation. They could mend broken mate bonds. They could heal wounds that no medicine could reach. They could, in the old stories, call the moon down from the sky and wrap it around themselves like armor. Your mother's journal, Serana said. The parts written in lunar script. Their instructions. She was teaching you, Elara, even after she died. The journal is a manual. It describes techniques for channeling your bloodline power. Healing, shielding, bonding. And one other thing. What? Sight. The word landed in Elara's darkness like a stone dropped into deep water. Lunar wolves see with more than their eyes, Serana said. The eyes are just one channel. The blood is another. The bond is another. Your mother's journal describes a technique for shifting your vision from your eyes to your blood. You would see the world differently. Not colors, not shapes, not the way you used to see. You would see the living essence of things, the connections between them, the light that everything carries inside it. Elara's hands were shaking. Can you teach me? She asked. Serana was quiet for a moment. Then, I can translate the journal. The technique is beyond what I've seen anyone attempt. But your mother believed you could do it. She wrote it for you. Kyle, who had been standing by the tent wall listening to everything, stepped forward. He put his hand on Elara's shoulder. She reached up and covered it with her own. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. I want to try, she said. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Elara's life, and she had lived a life that did not lack for hardship. Serana stayed, not because Kyle wanted her to, and not without conditions. She was given a tent at the edge of the camp, and her wolves, the 50 or so lunar wolves who had come with her, were permitted to camp in the forest beyond the perimeter. There was an uneasy truce between the Iron Veil wolves and the lunar wolves, the kind of peace that exists between two dogs sharing a yard, all careful distances and averted eyes, and occasional low growling. But Serana translated the journal. Every evening, she sat with Elara in the medical tent and read the lunar script aloud, translating each passage into common tongue, while Elara listened with the total concentration of someone hearing their own history told for the first time. The journal was not what Elara had expected. She had known the common tongue sections by heart. The herb recipes, the treatment protocols, the careful observations of plant growth and seasonal variation. Those sections were practical, professional, the work of a skilled herb keeper documenting her craft. The lunar script sections were something else entirely. They were letters, not instructions, but letters, written in the voice of a woman talking to a daughter she knew she might not live to see grow up. My darling girl, you are reading this, which means I am gone, and I am sorry for that. I am sorry for every day I was not there to explain. I am sorry for the cellar and the cold and the loneliness. I am sorry most of all that I could not tell you what you are, because knowing would have put you in danger, and I chose your life over your understanding. I hope someday you will forgive me for that choice. Elara sat in the darkness behind her empty eyes and listened to her mother's words read in her aunt's voice, and she did not cry. She did not cry because crying would have been too small for what she felt. What she felt was larger than tears. It was a shifting of foundations, a rewriting of the basic assumptions on which she had built her entire understanding of herself. She was not an omega. She was not worthless. She was not the shadow that the grey mist pack had made her believe she was. She was a lunar wolf, the daughter of a woman who had given up everything to keep her safe, the inheritor of a bloodline that could change the world. And she was the mate of the Alpha King, who was standing outside the medical tent in the cold, listening to everything, his wolf pressed against his skin like an animal trying to break through a wall. The technique described in the journal was called moon blood sight. It required the lunar wolf to draw their blood awareness upward, through the body, through the network of veins and capillaries, and focus it in the space behind the eyes where vision had once lived. Not to restore the eyes themselves, but to create a new kind of seeing, one that operated on the same wavelength as the mate bond, the pack bond, the deep ancient connections that tied all wolves to one another and to the moon. Elara practiced every night. She sat in the tent with her legs crossed and her palms open on her knees, and she breathed, and she reached inside herself for the light that Sorana said lived in her blood. She could feel it, faintly, like heat from a fire in the next room, present but untouchable. On the 5th night, she nearly had it. The light surged, and for a fraction of a second, she saw something. Not the tent. Not the fire. Something else. A web of golden threads connecting everything around her. The wolves in their tents, the trees beyond the camp, the mountain above, the moon above that. A web of life and connection so vast and intricate that her mind could barely process a single thread of it before the vision collapsed and the darkness rushed back in. She gasped. Her hands went to her face. What happened? Kael was beside her. He was always beside her now. She could feel his presence like a second heartbeat, steady and warm and close. I saw something, she said. Her voice was shaking. For a second, like a web. Everything connected. His hand found hers, large and warm and calloused and infinitely gentle. You can do this, he said. How do you know? Because you've already done harder things. You walked into a blizzard and gave your eyes to save wolves who never thanked you. This is just the next walk. And this time, you're not alone. She turned toward him. Her empty eyes, storm grey and silver-ringed, searched for his face in the darkness. She found it the way she always found him, by heat and scent and the pull of the bond between them. The bond she had been resisting for weeks, because accepting it meant accepting that she deserved it. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why me? You're a king. You could have anyone. You could have someone strong and beautiful and whole, someone who can see your face and fight beside you, and be the kind of Luna that your pack deserves. Instead, you got a blind herb keeper from a pack of nobodies who sleeps on a cot and talks to plants." He was quiet for a moment. Then he took her hand and placed it on his chest, over his heart. She could feel the steady drum of it under her palm, the vibration of his wolf somewhere beneath the bone, the heat of his skin through the thin shirt he wore. "My wolf chose you," he said. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because you make medicine blind, better than any healer I've ever met. I'm here because you traded the most precious thing you had for wolves you didn't even know. I'm here because you laugh at my jokes, and you argue with my healer, and you organize my camp's medical supplies into a system that's actually logical for the first time in 12 years. I'm here because you hum when you work, and you talk to plants like they're colleagues, and you eat bread like it might be the last bread you ever get. And every single one of those things makes my wolf want to lie down at your feet and never move again." She was crying now. She couldn't feel the tears because her eyes didn't work the same way anymore. But he could see them, tracking down her cheeks, catching the firelight. "I'm afraid," she said. "I know. I'm afraid that if I let myself have this, it'll be taken away. The way everything else has been taken. My mother, my eyes, my home. Every good thing I've ever had has been temporary. I don't know how to hold something permanent." "Then we'll learn together," he said, "because I've never had a mate before. I don't know how to do this either. I just know that being near you is the only time my wolf has ever been quiet, and I would very much like it to stay quiet, because honestly, 32 years of an angry wolf inside your chest is exhausting." She laughed. It was a wet, broken, real laugh, and it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. And his wolf did something it had never done before. It lay down. It closed its eyes. It soared. Elara leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his chest. His arms came around her. He held her the way you hold something precious and breakable and utterly essential. Carefully, completely, with the understanding that if he dropped it, the sound would follow him for the rest of his life. "I want to try the bond," she said into his shirt. "You're sure?" "No, but I want to try anyway." He tilted her chin up with one finger. Her face was wet, and her eyes were empty, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was careful, gentle. The first kiss of someone who had never been kissed, and someone who had kissed others, but never like this, never with the bond singing between them like a wire struck by lightning. She tasted of salt and cold water, and the bitter green herbs she had been handling that day, and underneath it all, the warm, sweet silver of moonlight. Her hands came up and found his face. She mapped him by touch, her fingers tracing his jaw, his cheekbones, the scar that ran from his left temple to his ear. She learned his features the way she learned everything, through contact, through sensation, through the patient accumulation of detail. "You're crying," she said. She could feel the wetness on his cheeks. "No, I'm not," he said. "Liar. I can hear your heartbeat. It does the same thing mine does when I'm trying not to cry." He kissed her again. This time, it was not careful. It was the kiss of a wolf, who had waited 32 years for his mate and was done being patient. It was deep and consuming, and she met it with a fierceness that surprised them both, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, closer, as though she could climb inside the warmth of him and never come out. The bond snapped into place between them like a cable pulled taut. She felt it, a golden thread connecting her chest to his, vibrating with a frequency that she could feel in her teeth and her bones, and the spaces between her ribs. It was warm. It was real. It was permanent. And through the bond, she saw him, not with her eyes, with the moon-blood sight, which had been building inside her for weeks, and which the bond, the final connection, the last missing piece, activated like a key turning in a lock. She saw him in golden light. Not his face, not the features she had mapped with her fingers, but the essence of him. The shape of his wolf, massive and dark, curled around his spine like smoke. The lattice of his bonds, threads connecting him to his pack, his wolves, his territory. And the brightest thread of all, the one that ran from his heart to hers, blazing with a light so intense it hurt. She gasped, her eyes widened. "I can see you," she whispered. The look on his face, the one she could now see in golden threads and light and connection, was something she would remember for the rest of her life. The crisis came 3 days later. The Ashland Council had learned of Ilara's existence. Sorana's arrival at the Iron Vale camp had been noticed, tracked, reported. A force of 200 council wolves, led by a wolf named Aldrich, who held the title of Enforcer and who had spent the last decade hunting lunar wolves across the northern territories, was moving north through the forests toward the camp. Torin brought the news at dawn. Kael received it standing in the entrance of his tent, with Ilara beside him, her hand on his arm, her moon-blood sight painting the world in threads of gold and shadow around her. "How long?" Kael asked. 6 hours, maybe less. They're moving fast." "How many?" 200. Armed. Aldrich is with them. He has 3 alphas from the eastern packs backing him. They have council authorization for... Torin hesitated. "Extraction. They want to take her," Kael said. "They want to take all of them. Every lunar wolf in the camp. The council's position hasn't changed in 20 years. Lunar blood is classified as an uncontrolled asset. They want it contained." Kael's wolf rose. Not gradually. Not the slow escalation of anger building toward action. This was instantaneous, a detonation, the wolf surging to the surface with a force that cracked the ground beneath his feet. Literally. The frozen earth split in a line radiating outward from where he stood, and the sound of it was like a bone breaking. Ilara felt it through the bond. His rage. Not the hot, bright anger of a man who has been insulted, but the cold, deep, geological anger of an alpha whose mate has been threatened. It was vast. It was terrifying. And it was, she realized with a jolt of clarity that cut through her own fear like a blade, controllable. He was not losing control. He was choosing to show his wolves what their alpha would become if the council touched what was his. "Call the pack," he said. His voice was the wolf's voice. "Every fighter, every scout, every wolf who can hold a line. We don't run." Sorana appeared from her tent. Her amber eyes were hard. "My wolves will fight with yours," she said. Kael looked at her. 3 days ago he would have refused. 3 days ago she had been a threat, an intruder, a woman who wanted to use Ilara for her own purposes. But something had changed. The translation sessions, the journal, the quiet hours Sorana had spent sitting beside Ilara in the medical tent, reading their shared sister's words, and the way Serana's mask had slipped more often and more completely as the days passed, revealing underneath the warrior and the strategist a woman who had loved her sister and who was beginning, cautiously, provisionally, to love her sister's daughter. Together, Kael said, the Battle of the Iron Vale camp was not the grand, dramatic clash of armies that the old stories would have you believe. It was fast and ugly and chaotic, the way real fights always are, and it was decided not by strength or numbers, but by a blind woman standing in the snow with moonlight pouring from her hands. Aldrich's forces hit the camp from the south. 200 wolves in battle formation, disciplined and well-armed, crashing against the Iron Vale line like a wave against a seawall. The Iron Vale wolves held. Barely. Kael was everywhere, a massive dark shape in wolf form, faster than anything that size should have been, his jaws closing on throats and his claws opening lines in flesh, and his howl splitting the air with a sound that made even his own wolves flinch. But 200 was too many. The line buckled, broke. Council wolves poured through the gap, and the camp descended into individual combat, wolf against wolf, and the snow turned red. Elara stood in the center of it. She couldn't fight. She was blind, despite the moon blood sight, which showed her the world in threads and connections, but didn't give her the spatial awareness needed for combat. She was useless. She was not useless. The first wounded wolf was dragged to her by Torin, a young female with a gash across her ribs that was bleeding badly. Elara knelt and pressed her hands to the wound, and the moonlight came. Not the faint glow of before. This was bright. This was a pillar of silver light that erupted from her palms and poured into the wound like water filling a vessel, and the wound closed, not slowly, instantly, skin knitting together, muscle reconnecting, the wolf gasping as pain was replaced by warmth. Then another wolf, and another. Elara healed them as fast as they could be brought to her, her hands blazing with silver light, the moon blood sight showing her each wound as a dark tear in the golden fabric of the wolf's being, and her power mending it like thread closing a seam. She healed 14 wolves in 20 minutes, wolves who would have died. Wolves who stood up whole and turned and went back to the fight and hit the council line with the desperate ferocity of those who have been given a second life. Aldrich saw her. The enforcer, a lean grey wolf with intelligence in his eyes and efficiency in his movements, saw the blind woman glowing like a second moon in the center of the camp. And he understood, with the cold clarity of a predator, that she was the key. Kill her, or take her. And the resistance collapsed. He came through the fighting like a missile, low and fast, his wolves clearing a path. He shifted to human form as he ran, drawing a blade, silver-edged, designed for killing things that were hard to kill. Kael saw him too late. The Alpha King was 300 yards away, pinned by 4 council wolves who had been sent specifically to keep him occupied. He saw the enforcer and his mate and the distance between them, and he howled, a sound that was not battle and not fury, but pure, distilled terror. The terror of a wolf watching death approach the only thing in the world that mattered. Elara heard the footsteps. She couldn't see the blade, but she could see, through the moonblood sight, the dark intention behind it. Aldrich's golden threads were tight and sharp and aimed at her like arrows. She raised her hands. What happened next was not in the journal. Not in any lunar wolf text Serana had ever read. Not in any story or legend or whispered history of the moon blood line. The light that came from Elara's hands was not silver. It was white, pure white, the color of the moon at its zenith on a clear winter night. It erupted from her in a sphere that expanded outward at the speed of sound, passing through everything, through wolves and tendants and trees and saw, and where it touched the council wolves, they dropped. Not dead, not injured. They simply fell, their bodies going limp, their wolves receding, the fight draining out of them like water from a broken cup. Aldrich fell 3 feet from Elara. His blade hit the snow. His eyes rolled back. He collapsed face down in the slush and did not move. The silence that followed was absolute. 200 council wolves lay in the snow, breathing but unconscious. The Iron Veil wolves stood among them, panting, blooded, alive, staring at the blind woman in the center of the camp, who was glowing like a star, and who very slowly lowered her hands and stopped glowing and sat down in the snow because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Kyle reached her. He shifted as he ran, human hands replacing wolf paws, and he slid to his knees beside her and gathered her up and held her against his chest so tightly that she could feel his heartbeat and his wolf's heartbeat and the echoing thunder of the bond between them. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "Are you hurt? Elara, answer me." "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was thread thin. "I'm just tired." "You just knocked out 200 wolves with your bare hands." "I know." She paused. "Is that weird?" His laugh was more of a sob. "Yes. That's extremely weird. That's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And I've been alive for 32 years. And I've seen some strange things." She pressed her face into his neck and breathed him in. Wood smoke and pin and leather and the warm copper of blood, and beneath it all, the scent that was just him. That had been hers since the first breath she had taken of it on the mountain. "I could feel them," she whispered, "through the light. The council wolves. They weren't evil, Kyle. They were following orders. Most of them were scared. Some of them didn't even want to be there. I could feel it in their threads. One of them was thinking about his daughter. She's 3 years old, and she just started walking, and he was afraid he wouldn't see her take her next steps. She fell quiet, so I put them to sleep instead of killing them. The aftermath was complicated, as aftermaths always are. The council wolves woke up, groggy and confused and disarmed, to find themselves sitting in the snow surrounded by Iron Veil fighters who were in no mood for further violence, but who were also in no mood to be lenient. Aldrich the Enforcer was brought before Kyle in chains. Kyle expected defiance. He expected the cold professionalism of a man who did ugly jobs for institutional reasons and felt justified by authority. Instead, Aldrich sat in the snow with his chains in his lap, and he looked up at Kyle and said, "The council is wrong about them." "What?" "The lunar wolves. I've been hunting them for 10 years. I've tracked them across the north. I've brought them in. And every single one of them was just a person. A farmer. A teacher. A mother. Not weapons, not threats. Just people with an unusual bloodline who wanted to be left alone." "Then why did you keep hunting them?" "Because the council told me they were dangerous, and I believed it because believing it was easier than admitting that I'd spent a decade doing something monstrous." He looked at Elara, who was standing beside Kyle, with the fur coat around her shoulders, and her blind eyes turned toward his voice. "She could have killed us," Aldrich said. "All of us. I felt the power when it hit me. It could have been lethal." She chose to put us to sleep instead. He looked back at Kyle. That's not the action of a weapon, Alpha King. That's the action of a healer. Kyle released him. He released all of them. The council wolves left the camp in a ragged column, disarmed but unharmed, walking south through the snow toward the lowlands. Aldrich went with them. At the edge of the tree line, the enforcer turned back and looked at Alara one more time, and the expression on his face was something that took Kyle a long time to identify. It was shame. The specific, quiet shame of a man who has been given a clear look at the moral weight of his own choices and has found them heavier than he expected. That night, in the tent, by the light of the iron stove that smelled of wood smoke and cedar, Kyle marked his mate. The ceremony was not public. There would be time for the public ceremony later, at the Iron Vale stronghold, with the pack gathered and the moon overhead, and the formal words spoken in the old tongue. This was private. This was between them. He held her face in his hands, and she held his wrists, and they breathed together, in and out, their heartbeats synchronizing through the bond, until they were one rhythm, one pulse, one wolf in two bodies. "Are you sure?" he asked. She answered by tilting her head, baring the curve of her neck, the soft skin where the pulse lived. It was the most vulnerable gesture a wolf could make. The exposure of the throat, the invitation to bite. His wolf surged forward, his teeth extended. He pressed his mouth to the junction of her neck and shoulder, and he bit down carefully, precisely, enough to break the skin, enough to send the bond surging through both of them like an electric current. Not enough to harm. She gasped. Her hands tightened on his wrists. The moon-blood sight exploded behind her empty eyes, and she saw their bond, their specific bond, the golden thread that connected them. And it was blazing, incandescent, a line of pure light that ran from her heart to his and back again in an endless loop. "Mine," he said against her skin. "Yours," she said. The mark settled into her skin. A crescent shape, silver against the tan of her neck. The physical manifestation of a bond that could not be broken, could not be denied, could not be undone by distance or time, or the cruelty of wolves who did not understand what they were looking at. Spring came to the northern territories the way it always did, gradually, and then all at once, the snow retreating up the mountains like a tide going out, the rivers breaking free of their ice with sounds like cannon fire, the first green things pushing up through the mud with a determination that Alara found personally relatable. The Iron Vale stronghold sat on a rocky promontory above the confluence of two rivers. It was not a castle. It was something older and more practical, a complex of stone buildings and timber halls surrounded by a wall that had been built and rebuilt over generations until it was less a fortification and more a permanent feature of the landscape, like a cliff face or a ridge. Alara arrived at the stronghold on a clear morning in early spring. She rode in a wagon because Kyle refused to let her walk the distance, and she refused to let him carry her again. So the wagon was their compromise, and she sat in the back among the supply crates, with the fur coat around her shoulders, and the moon-blood sight showing her the stronghold as a constellation of golden threads. Hundreds of wolves connected to one another and to the land, and to the Alpha whose bond hummed in her chest like a second heartbeat. The pack was waiting. 200 wolves, assembled in the main courtyard, their faces turned toward the wagon, with expressions that ranged from curiosity to suspicion, to something that was not quite hostility, but was definitely not warmth. Kyle helped her down from the wagon. She stood in the courtyard with her blind eyes and her crescent mark and her thin coat that she still wore sometimes out of habit, even though Kael had provided her with 6 different coats, each warmer and finer than the last, because the thin coat was hers, and she was still learning that she was allowed to keep things. "This is Elara," Kael said to his pack. His voice carried across the courtyard without effort, the voice of an alpha whose authority was not a performance, but a fact of physics. "She is my mate, your Luna. She gave her eyes to save your wolves from the blight. She healed 14 of your fighters in the battle of the camp. She carries Luna blood and Moon blood sight, and a courage that puts most of you to shame. And I am telling you this not as a request for your approval, but as a statement of fact that will not change regardless of your opinion." Silence. Then Dael, the young scout whose blindness Elara's sacrifice had cured, stepped forward from the crowd. He was 19 and thin, and his eyes, clear and brown and seeing, were bright with tears. He knelt. One by one the pack followed. Not all of them, not immediately. But enough. Enough wolves dropping to one knee in the spring mud, their heads bowed, the gesture of acknowledgement and acceptance that was, in wolf culture, the highest honor a pack could offer. Elara couldn't see them kneeling, but she could feel it through the moon blood sight. Dozens of golden threads tilting downward, inclining toward her, and the sensation was so overwhelming that her own knees nearly buckled. Kael's hand found hers, steady. The months that followed were the first months of Elara's life that she would later describe as happy, not easy. Happy. There was a difference, and she was learning it. She established an herbalist's workshop in the stronghold. It occupied 3 rooms on the ground floor of the east wing, with windows that she couldn't see through, but that let in the scent of the herb garden she planted below them. Valerian and feverfew and wolfsbane and moonflower, the moonflower seeds carried from the grey mist in a wooden box that still smelled of her mother's cellar. She healed wolves, not just the Iron Veil wolves, but wolves from other packs who came to the stronghold seeking the Luna healer, the blind woman whose hands glowed with moonlight. She healed broken bones and infected wounds and the lingering effects of the blight, and, in one case that left even Serana stunned, a severed mate bond between 2 wolves who had been forcibly separated by a rival pack. Serana stayed, not at the stronghold itself, but nearby, in a settlement she established for the remaining Luna wolves, a place where they could live openly for the first time in a generation. The relationship between Serana and Elara remained complicated, a mixture of family obligation and genuine affection, and the unspoken tension of 2 women who shared blood and loss, but who had processed that loss in fundamentally different ways. But it was growing, slowly. The way plants grow in rocky soil, finding whatever purchase is available and holding on. Kael ruled. He attended councils and negotiated treaties and managed the 1,000 small and large crises that constituted governance of the strongest pack in the Northern Territories. And every evening, regardless of what the day had brought, he returned to their chambers, and he found Elara, and he held her, and his wolf lay down and closed its eyes, and was quiet. She learned to use the moon blood sight with increasing precision. She could see the wolves of the pack as individual constellations of golden light, each one unique, each one connected to the others in patterns that told her things about their health, their emotions, their bonds, their fears. She could not see faces. She could not see colors. She would never again watch the moonflower seeds split open in spring, or read the handwriting in her mother's journal. But she could see the bond between herself and Kail, that blazing thread of golden light, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen with any kind of sight. On a night in late summer, Elara stood on the rampart above the stronghold's eastern wall. The air smelled of warm stone and river water, and the first hint of autumn in the high forests. Kael stood behind her, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on the top of her head. Below them, in the courtyard, the pack was gathering for the midsummer feast. She could hear them, laughter and argument and the clatter of preparation. She could feel them through the moon-blood sight, a constellation of golden lights moving and intersecting and pulsing with life. She put her hand on her stomach. It was still flat, but she could feel, through the sight, the faintest new thread of gold. Tiny. Barely there. Connected to her and to Kael, and already, impossibly, already reaching out toward the pack with threads of its own. Kael's arms tightened around her. He had felt it too, through the bond. The faint new warmth. The impossible beginning. She tilted her head back against his chest. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear. His wolf was quiet. The mark on her neck, the silver crescent, pulsed once with warmth. Below them, the feast fires were being lit. Sparks rose into the darkening sky. Somewhere in the crowd, Dael the young scout was arguing with the cook about the venison stew, and Torin was breaking up a dispute between two juveniles, and Declan the healer was telling anyone who would listen that his new herb keeper assistant was almost as good as the Luna, but not quite, never quite, because no one would ever be as good as the Luna. Elara closed her empty, silver-ringed eyes. She opened the moon-blood sight wide, and she watched the pack, her pack, blaze like a field of stars against the warm summer dark, every thread connected, every light burning, and the newest light of all, the smallest, growing steadily brighter beneath her hands.